So I'm just back from the Twins, Minnesota Twins winning the baseball here. I went with some Uniting Church colleagues, and it was a good opportunity to process day two of the conference. Today, the highlight for me was hearing Otis Moss III preach on the Gospel of Luke and the man on the mat being lowered before Jesus. Otis Moss III began with a reflection from Malcolm X and moved through a series of really powerful reflections. The first to me was the idea that it was the religious people, the teachers and the religious authorities who had filled the house that Jesus was teaching in. And even though they were there to listen to him, they weren't there to hear him or to live out what he said. And it was those who were on the edge and outside who had to go through unorthodox means by taking apart the roof to get their friend before Jesus, that there wasn't a way in for them except unorthodox means because the religious people had used orthodoxy to keep them out. There was a reflection on the need for friends who lift us up and who bless us, who God blesses us through. And the idea that if it were not for these four men or women or friends who were carrying the mat that the man was on, and he wouldn't have got there. And that they weren't trying to get him healed. That at no point did any of them ask Jesus to heal the man, but that they simply wanted to bring the man into the presence of God, into the presence of the living God, and that each of them was content to focus on the corner of the mat they were carrying without worrying about the others' corners, without getting jealous of the corners of the others, without trying to tell others how to do their job. That each focused on their corner. And he reflected on how the different denominations of the church might learn from this. He then also reflected that Jesus didn't tell the man to get up and walk away. He told him to pick up his mat. And that while it's tempting to leave our baggage and our brokenness and the things of the past behind us, it is actually carrying those things with us under our arm, carrying our mat under our arm, that it proves testimony to the healing power of God. Also this afternoon, I went to a lecture by Willem On from the United Methodist Church, who used modelled humour and its power in moral imagination and prophetic preaching. He was challenging, he was confronting, he called out his own denomination for the recent same-sex marriage lack of decision. He challenged other denominations. He invited us through story and comedy and humour to see moral imagination in a new and different way. He invited us to see a different way of viewing the world, and stated that you can only act in a world that you can see. And we needed the power of different narratives to help us see that. And for him, he said, we've used too long pastoral ministry as an excuse to escape the prophetic voice. And if we aren't going to be prophetic, there's no point being preachers. This morning, Barbara Lumland again spoke. This time she ran a workshop that I went to, looking at how we move through resistance, ways to move through points of resistance, whether that's about theology or style or the preacher, and some resources and strategies we could use. These included using the Bible and using the Bible as our friend, particularly the Revised Lectionary, and the way it throws up texts that we're not then responsible for choosing. She spoke about trying to find common ground with people and help people to think about the ways we read the scripture. She said that story and narrative is always more powerful than statistics. And it's helpful to share the journey that we ourselves have been on, as well as to find helpful terms for framing things. She actually challenged those of us who were Anglo to not use the term white privilege with our congregations because it actually doesn't break through, and instead invited us to see our white conditioning, the way that we had been raised in a white culture to see things through a white lens, and how that might actually be a term that helps invite people into change. She invited us to move from the familiar to the strange, to start from the least resistance to the most resistance. And she used an example from Forbes of speaking to a group of Pentecostals, and he said to them, I used to think that non-Pentecostals couldn't preach the word, and then I heard it. I used to think that white pastors couldn't preach the word, but then I saw them do it. I used to think that women couldn't preach the word, and then I heard it for myself. And when someone asked him, but what about gay people, preacher? His response was, well, I didn't used to think so, but now I have seen it for myself. He brought the people on the same journey he went on. Finally, she invited us to talk about church in declarative rather than imperative terms. That we are a community of fellowship, that we are a community of hospitality, not that you should be. Finally, I listened to Rolf Jacobson this morning run a workshop around expanding preaching from just storytelling or preaching as biblical narrative and exegesis and information, to also moving to preaching as moral and spiritual formation. And he had 3 steps that he saw us needing to do in our sermon. Our liturgies, our Western liturgies, he said, are uniquely placed to help people to grow in a number of the communal Christian practices. But in order to do that, we need in our sermons to set time aside not just to inform people or describe the practices, but to model them and then to invite people to practice them. So, how might we as preachers not just speak about the power of prayer, but model how to pray for our neighbour and then invite our congregations during the service to pray for one another? So that's sort of the summary of today. There was a lot of other powerful preaching around the place that I heard about, and I'm going to be buying some recordings, I think, before I come home. Tomorrow, Brian McLaren's on in the morning, and I haven't quite figured out my afternoon yet. But I'll see you then.